Isambard Kingdom. Brunel FRS was an English mechanical and civil engineer who is considered one of the most ingenious and prolific figures in engineering history, one of the 19th century engineering giants, and one of the greatest figures of the Industrial Revolution, who changed the face of the English landscape with his groundbreaking designs and ingenious constructions. Brunel built dockyards, the Great Western Railway, a series of steamships including the first propeller-driven transatlantic steamship, and numerous important bridges and tunnels. His designs revolutionized public transport and modern engineering. Though Brunel's projects were not always successful, they often contained innovative solutions to long-standing engineering problems. During his career, Brunel achieved many engineering firsts, including assisting in the building of the first tunnel under a navigable river and development of SS Great Britain, the first propeller-driven ocean-going iron ship, which was at the time also the largest ship ever built. Brunel set the standard for a well-built railway, using careful surveys to minimize grades and curves. This necessitated expensive construction techniques and new bridges and viaducts, and the 2-mile-long box tunnel. One controversial feature was the wide gauge, a broad gauge, of 7 feet 1/4 in, instead of what was later to be known as standard gauge, of 4 feet 8½ in. The wider gauge added to passenger comfort but made construction much more expensive and caused difficulties when eventually it had to interconnect with other railways using the narrower gauge. As a result of the Regulating the Gauge of Railways Act 1846, the gauge was changed to standard gauge throughout the GWR network. Brunel astonished Britain by proposing to extend the Great Western Railway westward to North America by building steam-powered iron-hulled ships. He designed and built 3 ships that revolutionized naval engineering. In 2002, Brunel was placed second in a BBC public poll to determine the 100 Greatest Britons. In 2006, the bicentenary of his birth, a major program of events celebrated his life and work under the name Brunel 200. Name: Brunel's unique name is an amalgamation of his parents' names. He inherited the family name of his father, and his middle name is his mother's surname. This was a common name construction for the time. Brunel's first name, Isambard, comes from his father's middle name, which was also his father's preferred given name. Isambard is a Norman name of Germanic origin, meaning iron bright. A cognate name is the German surname, Isambard, which can still be found today among Bavarians and German Americans. Early life: the son of French civil engineer Marc Isambard Brunel and Sophia Kingdom, Isambard Kingdom. Brunel was born on 9 April 1806 in Britton Street, Portsea, Portsmouth, Hampshire, where his father was working on block-making machinery. He had 2 older sisters, Sophia and Emma, and the whole family moved to London in 1808 for his father's work. Brunel had a happy childhood, despite the family's constant money worries, with his father acting as his teacher during his early years. His father taught him drawing and observational techniques from the age of 4, and Brunel had learned Euclidean geometry by 8. During this time he also learned fluent French and the basic principles of engineering. He was encouraged to draw interesting buildings and identify any faults in their structure. When Brunel was 8, he was sent to Dr. Morel's boarding school in Hove, where he learned the classics. His father, a Frenchman by birth, was determined that Brunel should have access to the high-quality education he had enjoyed in his youth in France. Accordingly, at the age of 14, the younger Brunel was enrolled first at the College of Caen in Normandy, then at Lycée Henri IV in Paris. When Brunel was 15, his father Marc, who had accumulated debts of over £5,000, was sent to a debtor's prison. After 3 months went by with no prospect of release, Mark let it be known that he was considering an offer from the Tsar of Russia. In August 1821, facing the prospect of losing a prominent engineer, the government relented and issued Mark £5,000 to clear his debts in exchange for his promise to remain in Britain. When Brunel completed his studies at Henry IV in 1822, his father had him presented as a candidate of the renowned engineering school École Polytechnique, but as a foreigner he was deemed ineligible for entry. Brunel subsequently studied under the prominent master clockmaker and horologist Abraham Louis Breguet, who praised Brunel's potential in letters to his father. In late 1822, having completed his apprenticeship, Brunel returned to England. Thames Tunnel. Brunel worked for several years as an assistant engineer on the project to create a tunnel under London's River Thames between Rotherhithe and Wapping, with tunnellers driving a horizontal shaft from one side of the river to the other under the most difficult and dangerous conditions. Brunel's father, Mark, was the chief engineer, and the project was funded by the Thames Tunnel Company. The composition of the riverbed at Rotherhithe was often little more than waterlogged sediment and loose gravel. An ingenious tunneling shield designed by Mark Brunel helped protect workers from cave-ins, but 2 incidents of severe flooding halted work for long periods, killing several workers and badly injuring the younger Brunel. The latter incident, in 1828, killed the 2 most senior miners, and Brunel himself narrowly escaped death. He was seriously injured, and spent 6 months recuperating. The event stopped work on the tunnel for several years. Though the Thames Tunnel was eventually completed during Mark Brunel's lifetime, his son had no further involvement with the tunnel proper, only using the abandoned works at Rotherhithe to further his abortive gas experiments. This was based on an idea of his father's, and was intended to develop into an engine that ran on power generated from alternately heating and cooling a gas made from ammonium carbonate and sulfuric acid. Despite interest from several parties, the experiments were judged by Brunel to be a failure on the grounds of fuel economy alone, and were discontinued after 1834. In 1865, the East London Railway Company purchased the Thames Tunnel for £200,000, and 4 years later the first trains passed through it. Subsequently, the tunnel became part of the London Underground system, and remains in use today. Originally as part of the East London Line, now incorporated into the London Overground. Bridges. Brunel is perhaps best remembered for designs for the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. The bridge was built to designs based on Brunel's, but with significant changes. Spanning over 702 feet, and nominally 249 feet above the River Avon, it had the longest span of any bridge in the world at the time of construction. Brunel submitted 4 designs to a committee headed by Thomas Telford, but Telford rejected all entries, proposing his own design instead. Vociferous opposition from the public forced the organizing committee to hold a new competition, which was won by Brunel. Afterwards, Brunel wrote to his brother-in-law, the politician Benjamin Hawes, "Of all the wonderful feats I have performed since I have been in this part of the world, I think yesterday I performed the most wonderful. I produced unanimity among 15 men who were all quarreling about that most ticklish subject, taste." Work on the Clifton Bridge started in 1831, but was suspended due to the Queen Square riots caused by the arrival of Sir Charles Wetherell in Clifton. The riots drove away investors, leaving no money for the project, and construction ceased. Brunel did not live to see the bridge finished, although his colleagues and admirers at the Institution of Civil Engineers felt it would be a fitting memorial, and started to raise new funds and to amend the design. Work recommenced in 1862 and was completed in 1864, 5 years after Brunel's death. In 2011 it was suggested, by historian and biographer Adrian Vaughan, that Brunel did not design the bridge, as eventually built. as the later changes to its design were substantial. His views reflected a sentiment stated 52 years earlier by Tom Rollt in his 1959 book Brunel. Re-engineering of suspension chains recovered from an earlier suspension bridge was one of many reasons given why Brunel's design could not be followed exactly. In May 1845, Hungerford Bridge, a suspension footbridge across the Thames near Charing Cross Station in London, was opened. Its central span was 676.5 feet, and its cost was £106,000. It was replaced by a new railway bridge in 1859, and the suspension chains were used to complete the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The Clifton Suspension Bridge still stands, and over 4 million vehicles traverse it every year. Brunel designed many bridges for his railway projects, including the Royal Albert Bridge spanning the River Tamar at Saltash near Plymouth, Somerset Bridge, the Windsor Railway Bridge, and the Maidenhead Railway Bridge over the Thames in Berkshire. This last was the flattest, widest brick-arch bridge in the world and is still carrying mainline trains to the west, even though today's trains are about 10 times heavier than in Brunel's time. Throughout his railway building career, but particularly on the South Devon and Cornwall railways where economy was needed and there were many valleys to cross, Brunel made extensive use of wood for the construction of substantial viaducts. These have had to be replaced over the years as their primary material, kyanized Baltic pine, became uneconomical to obtain. Brunel designed the Royal Albert Bridge in 1855 for the Cornwall Railway, after Parliament rejected his original plan for a train ferry across the Hamos, the estuary of the tidal Tamar, Tavy and Liner. The bridge consists of two main spans of 455 feet, 100 feet above mean high spring tide, plus 17 much shorter approach spans. Opened by Prince Albert on 2 May 1859, it was completed in the year of Brunel's death. Several of Brunel's bridges over the Great Western Railway might be demolished because the line is to be electrified, and there is inadequate clearance for overhead wires. Buckinghamshire County Council is negotiating to have further options pursued, in order that all 9 of the remaining historic bridges on the line can be saved. Brunel's last major undertaking was the unique Three Bridges, London. Work began in 1856, and was completed in 1859. The three bridges in question are a clever arrangement allowing the routes of the Grand Junction Canal, Great Western and Brentford Railway, and Windmill Lane to cross each other. Great Western Railway. See also Brunel's 7-foot gauge and the Gauge War. In the early part of Brunel's life, the use of railways began to take off as a major means of transport for goods. This influenced Brunel's involvement in railway engineering, including railway bridge engineering. In 1833, before the Thames Tunnel was complete, Brunel was appointed chief engineer of the Great Western Railway, one of the wonders of Victorian Britain, running from London to Bristol and later Exeter. The company was founded at a public meeting in Bristol in 1833, and was incorporated by Act of Parliament in 1835. It was Brunel's vision that passengers would be able to purchase one ticket at London Paddington and travel from London to New York, changing from the Great Western Railway to the Great Western Steamship at the terminus in Neyland, West Wales. He surveyed the entire length of the route between London and Bristol himself, with the help of many including his solicitor Jeremiah Osborne of Bristol law firm Osborne Clark, who on one occasion rode Isambard Kingdom Brunel down the River Avon himself to survey the bank of the river for the route. Brunel made two controversial decisions: to use a broad gauge of 7 feet for the track, which he believed would offer superior running at high speeds, and to take a route that passed north of the Marlborough Downs, an area with no significant towns, though it offered potential connections to Oxford and Gloucester, and then to follow the Thames Valley into London. His decision to use broad gauge for the line was controversial in that almost all British railways to date had used standard gauge. Brunel said that this was nothing more than a carryover from the mine railways that George Stephenson had worked on prior to making the world's first passenger railway. Brunel proved through both calculation and a series of trials that his broader gauge was the optimum size for providing both higher speeds and a stable and comfortable ride to passengers. In addition, the wider gauge allowed for larger carriages and thus greater freight capacity. Drawing on Brunel's experience with the Thames Tunnel, the Great Western contained a series of impressive achievements: soaring viaducts such as the one in Ivy Bridge, specially designed stations, and vast tunnels including the Box Tunnel, which was the longest railway tunnel in the world at that time. There is an anecdote that the Box Tunnel may have been deliberately oriented so that the rising sun shines all the way through it on Brunel's birthday. The initial group of locomotives ordered by Brunel to his own specifications proved unsatisfactory, apart from the North Star locomotive, and 20-year-old Daniel Gooch was appointed as superintendent of locomotive engines. Brunel and Gooch chose to locate their locomotive works at the village of Swindon, at the point where the gradual ascent from London turned into the steep of descent to the Avon Valley at Bath. Brunel's achievements ignited the imagination of the technically minded Britons of the age, and he soon became quite notable in the country on the back of this interest. After Brunel's death, the decision was taken that standard gauge should be used for all railways in the country. At the original Welsh terminus of the Great Western Railway at Neyland, sections of the broad gauge rails are used as handrails at the quayside, and a number of information boards there depict various aspects of Brunel's life. There is also a larger-than-life bronze statue of him holding a steamship in one hand and a locomotive in the other. The statue has been replaced after an earlier theft. The present London Paddington Station was designed by Brunel and opened in 1854. Examples of his designs for smaller stations on the Great Western and associated lines which survive in good condition include Mortimer, Charlbury and Bridgend and Culham. Surviving examples of wooden train sheds in his style are at Frome and Kingsware. The great achievement that was the Great Western Railway has been immortalised at Swindon Steam Railway Museum and the Didcot Railway Centre. The Didcot Railway Centre is notable for having a reconstructed segment of 7 feet 1/4 in Brunel gauge track, as well as a very rare working steam locomotive in the same gauge. Overall, there were negative views as to how society viewed the railways. Some landowners felt the railways were a threat to amenities or property values, and others requested tunnels on their land so the railway could not be seen. Brunel's atmospheric caper, though unsuccessful, another of Brunel's interesting use of technical innovations was the atmospheric railway. Instead of using locomotives, the trains were moved by Clegg and Samuda's patented system of atmospheric traction, whereby stationary pumps sucked air from a pipe placed in the center of the track. The section from Exeter to Newton was completed on this principle, and trains ran at approximately 68 miles per hour. Pumping stations with distinctive square chimneys were sited at 2-mile intervals. 15-inch pipes were used on the level portions, and 22-inch pipes were intended for the steeper gradients. The technology required the use of leather flaps to seal the vacuum pipes. The natural oils were drawn out of the leather by the vacuum, making the leather vulnerable to water, rotting it and breaking the fibers when it froze during the winter of 1847. It had to be kept supple with tallow, which is attractive to rats. The flaps were eaten, and vacuum operation lasted less than a year, from 1847 to the 10th of September 1848. Deterioration of the valve due to the reaction of tannin and iron oxide has been cited as the last straw that sank the project, as the continuous valve began to tear from its rivets over most of its length, and the estimated replacement cost of £25,000 was considered prohibitive. It has been suggested that the whole project was an expensive flop. In Brunel's favor, it has been noted that he had the courage to call a halt to the venture instead of struggling on with it at greater cost. The system never managed to prove itself. The accounts of the SDR for 1848 suggest that atmospheric traction cost 3s1d per mile compared to 1s4d mile for conventional steam power. A number of South Devon Railway engine houses still stand, including that at Totnes and at Starcross, on the estuary of the River Exe, which is a striking landmark, and a reminder of the atmospheric railway, also commemorated as the name of the village pub. A section of the pipe, without the leather covers, is preserved at the Didcot Railway Centre.